So it's great to see so many people joining the BRC early career seminar series. And this session will talk about developing a personal and professional development training plan. So what I'm going to cover is it's basically kind of asking you to become a little bit existential. And it's really, where am I? Where do I want to be? Where do I go? And I want to specifically focus on fellowships because I'm aware that a number of you are preparing for fellowships, and this is a critical part for fellowships. So if we start with where am I? It's a really good question. And I think it's one that I think you need to ask yourself all the way along. It's like, where am I? Where am I going? What do I want to do? And it's a really important part of career planning, because career planning is a bit of an art more than a science. And to understand where you're going, you really need to understand, not only where you are now, but it's also, and as I'll talk about, what are the things that float your boat. Dave Jones, who was the first Academy, Dean of the NIHR Academy, used to always say that career planning only ever makes sense in retrospect. And I think there is part of that that is true, that you do things and you take up opportunities as they arise. But it's also important in terms of, if you're looking for some kind of transition and some kind of trajectory, that you sit down and kind of have a think about it. One of the really important things, and I think it's one of the things that we probably don't focus on enough, is really around what makes you get up in the morning. What are the things that are important to you? And there's Meg Selig talks about vital. So it's, what are your values? What are your interests? What's your temperament? What are your around-the-clock activities? What are your life missions and goals and strengths and weaknesses? Now, and that's all pretty heavy stuff. But there are kind of ways in which you can kind of have a think about these things. And there's a number of different ways that you can kind of tackle it. So things like your values and your interests might actually be pretty straightforward, and that you understand those, but perhaps your temperament isn't. And so one of the things is kind of, when you're on this type of journey, it's really important to kind of have a think about where it is, what it is that makes you tick. Now, I'm not a salesman, excuse me, but one of the things that certainly made a huge difference to me is doing a personality test. So when I just finished my master's, which, for those of you who I haven't told, it's just the most ridiculous master's, very kind of professionally focused about podiatry, just made absolutely no sense at all, and was having trouble kind of publishing it because I didn't think it wasn't a great piece of research. But I went to a writing retreat, and one of the things that they did is they did the Myers-Briggs personality inventory. And by just undertaking that, it kind of gave me a chance to think, hang on a tick, not everyone thinks like me, and not everyone writes like me. And at that time I was teaching, and not everyone teaches or learns like me. And it was one of those light bulb moments where it was like, right, okay, who am I? What am I trying to do? And this writing retreat was fantastic because what they did is they did the Myers-Briggs, and one of the really crazy things is that I was a censor, and one of the things that was stopping me from writing is that I was telling people something that they didn't want to hear. And how I could package that, and it was a real writing block for me. And so my master's project was around, how reliable a podiatrist, but for drawing lines on the back of legs and feet and measuring them. It was really important at the time. And guess what? They were terrible at it, and any of the physios are terrible at it too. And it was kind of like, I was trying to tell podiatrists they were rubbish at it, and it was around the block that was stopping me from doing that. And was one of the things was like, you don't have to waste time doing it, and that this isn't around kind of criticizing the profession, but this is around, and it was a way of just me reframing that question. And there are loads and loads of different personality inventories, and I think it's kind of worth doing, just because not necessarily what the art or what they say about you, but it's reflecting around what it is that's important to you. I also did a negotiate how to have difficult conversations seminar, and that was one of the things that they were saying is that you really need to understand your values in terms of the things that kind of create conflict for you. And I have a very strong core belief of fairness. And when I find things are unfair, it really starts ticking me off. And it's one of those flags for me that I have to kind of sit back and think, hang on a tick, I can't react. I need to kind of do this. So have a go. Even if it's like Hello Magazine personality inventory, I think it's kind of worth, not, as I was saying, not necessarily the outcome, but certainly reflecting on what it says. Okay, the other thing is to recognise it's a journey, and that you will have peaks and troughs as you plan kind of things in terms of any kind of personal development or professional development, and even in things like if you're training, doing exercise. And I think it's really important to know that it is will be kind of peaks and troughs, and that the long-term goal is really critical. And we did a session at Alton Hall with our ICA and IAC people, where we had a nifty fox who teaches people how to draw, talking about planning out your career trajectory. And she started off with a mountain kind of range, and I think, and to me that was really important in terms of kind of knowing that you will have some dips, and it's not a straightforward trajectory, and that there will be times, and some of those times you can actually plan for. So one of the things that we were talking about that is when you're planning your career is that if you're planning on having children, or you're planning on having a year off, or there are things that will kind of come in that will have an impact, and it's important to kind of plan for those. So the next step is kind of really understanding, undertaking personal inventory. And one of the really good things about being involved in research is you get to come across a huge variety of people, all who have different skills and competencies. And it's kind of trying to navigate where people are to see where they need to go next. And one of the things that a personal skills inventory helps you to do is to kind of say, okay, where am I? Who am I? And as I was saying, what do you bring? What do you need to get to the long-term goal or the next step, and how do you get there? And it's one of the things that when we're talking about particularly clinical academics, and we're talking particularly about health and care professionals, that they often come in with a lot of skills. They may be kind of quite advanced in their clinical career when they're coming to do a research project, and it's kind of working out what it is that what skills that they have and what they need. And I'm going to introduce you to something that should become if you're interested in doing research, it should be become a very good friend to you. And VTAs is an organisation that looks at supporting the development of research capabilities and research skills. And the website is there, and it's got a whole list of things to actually talk about supporting development of researchers. And one of the things is the VTA Researcher Development Framework. And this framework is it's basically, it's not perfect, but it's very good for people who, say, don't really know what skills you need to have and what you need to do to be a researcher. So it's particularly good at those people starting off on their research journey. But I find that it's particularly good the more senior that you get as well. And I'll explain that. But the big thing is it's not designed specifically for biomedical or biomedical research or patient-facing research. But it's designed for geographers. It's designed for mathematicians. So it's a really generic kind of framework. So what it has, it's developed. It's kind of divided into 4 different quadrants, and I'll go through each of those. And one of the things that it talks about, and I think this is the most obvious one, is when you think about when you're a researcher, what do you need to do? Researchers, you need specific knowledge and intellectual capabilities. And that's kind of the basic thing. And that's what people focus on quite a lot. And that's kind of absolutely appropriate and absolutely right. Then you've got research governance and organisation, and this is around, can you do research ethically and appropriately? And again, that's the type of thing I think that people tend to focus on. And what we see is, particularly when people are doing PhDs, that's often what their training and development is all about. But I wanted to bring you to the other areas. And if you kind of think of who are the people who really inspire you, who are the researchers who are fantastic, these are probably the skills that you're thinking about more. And these are critical skills to become a good researcher. So one is around personal effectiveness. And, that you think about, kind of leadership and thinking about kind of engaging people and bringing people along. It's a really important and often undervalued skill. And then the other one is engagement, influence, and impact. And again, these things, once you say them, of course they sound obvious, but it's really important in terms of not just kind of being able to do some work, but it's around the engagement and influence and impact of really getting, making sure that the research actually means something, that it gets to the right people, and it's actually of relevance to them. So they're the 4 quadrants, but I just want to show you what if we dig down into, say, what they call domain A, which is the knowledge and intellectual abilities. So what the framework does is it talks about, so it breaks it down a little bit. And I'll show you kind of what it goes. So it's got knowledge base, cognitive abilities, and creativity. And if you go into the framework, it's got all of these details around the type of things that you might need to have to demonstrate, as a competent researcher. And it talks about different levels. So, when the more senior you get, the more that you're supposed to look at it. Now, I did do this with someone I was mentoring, and said, why don't you do a personal inventory on using the Vitae framework to kind of see where she was. And she took this and she took it to kind of the nth degree. And so she was saying, I am for A4, A1.4, I'm a phase 2, for A16, and it's like, no, don't use it like this. This is a prompt to kind of get you thinking about the kind of skills and attributes, competencies that you need to develop. So, this is kind of that's for a different purpose, but it's just useful. And as I was saying, and it goes on, it's quite detailed. Particularly useful if you're just either getting into to research or you're trying to advance your research career in terms of where you go. And as I said, so it really helps in thinking about where do I want to be. And as I've already said this, I won't dwell on it too much. So I think the real value is for early career researchers to get away from just thinking about knowing stuff and being able to do stuff according to appropriate governance and legislation. But it's around, okay, what are the skills that I need to develop in terms of me developing as a researcher, as I develop the knowledge and governance skills. And then again, as I was saying, I find it really helpful, particularly for senior people, when it's looking at, okay, I've been and I've done this, I've done these courses, that's fine. What do I do next, or where do I need to go? And it's particularly helpful, I think, for them. And one of the things that we often find is that we have kind of, and particularly when we're dealing with our clinical people, is that you have people who could be quite advanced in their clinical skill set, but they're research naive. And one of the things we keep saying that PhD is just a driving license, and so it's only the beginning of your research career. And sometimes it's difficult for people who are particularly developed to kind of think of themselves as research naive, but you absolutely must. It's also we have people coming, again, the people who have the road, the very crazy road rather than a nice, simple projection of a career, will also have other skills that they have developed. And again, that can be really useful in terms of kind of what you need in terms of professional development. So the really big question is, where do you go for all of these skills? I see there's quite a lot of NHS people on the call, which is great. And certainly organisational development for the NHS, there's lots of courses there. But there's also other really important areas. So talk to your supervisors or managers, or talk to people who are kind of going in the direction of where you want to go. Talk to peers, and if you're looking at courses, talk to people who have done the course. So I'm going to give a big up for our organisational learning and professional development. If you're at Leeds and you don't know about this, well, then you're missing out on something fantastic. And this is part of all universities and NHS organisations. They will have a specific, to that organisation, to specific resources to help with personal and development and professional learning. So this is our organisational and professional development OPDL group, and they have a whole lot of courses that are for developing of staff, things like digital capabilities, a really strong leadership course, a leadership development program that it's a kind of based on a matrix around what kind of leadership you need and how you progressed from leading yourself into leading organisations. There's management development support, and because we've got a very strong research culture commitment here at Leeds. They've done courses based on the Vitae framework. And then there's courses associated with student education development. So really worth having a look at. And specifically, it's supporting researchers at Leeds. So it's got, some different courses, resources that are around things like, as I said, the Vitae framework, supporting and making sure that research culture is embedded into all that we do, research impact, research leadership. Research leadership, career development, and I can't see the bottom of my slide, but I have it on my screen. The bottom two are research integrity and ethics, open research hub, and research funding and outputs. So quite a lot for you to go at there. And certainly my experience of the organisational learning professional development courses are that they're very good. There's also, we have a mentorship scheme, and there are lots and lots of mentorship schemes around. There will be mentorship schemes around in NHS organisations. And so one of the things we suggest that people do, particularly when they're getting into research, is they look at getting a local mentor. So someone who's outside of their organisation, or their department, but knows about the organisation. We think that's incredibly important. But is able to kind of give you some independent advice. And so there will be lots of schemes available for you to have a look at. There's also professional development opportunities. So if you look at go on to any of the profession websites, they all offer bespoke kind of training. So CAPA, which is the community now of allied health professionals. The Royal College of General Practitioners has a whole suite of courses available. And then if you haven't come across this site, it's called CATCH. It's the Clinical Academic Training and Career Hub, specifically for clinical academics that have a whole lot of things that are relevant to clinical academics. But different organisations will have different development opportunities that are bespoke for their members. One of the kind of softer skills that I think is really important is around networking and collaborations. And so this is where things like conference and meetings, while they can be jollies, but they one of the reasons why they're important is they're a chance for you to meet peers and meet potential colleagues, collaborators, etc. And they are incredibly useful in again being being signposted to different opportunities or to different kind of activities. And they're really important to kind of make you see beyond your own organisation. Visits are also important, and they can be a really useful way of learning new skills and learning some of those softer skills that we're talking about in terms of engagement and influence, or they may be more specifically around knowledge and skill development. And then there's kind of the whole formal collaborators and informal collaborators. So formal collaborators are kind of people that you generally tend to work with, and that you have kind of an agreement in place. And then we all have informal collaborators people that, they might be working kind of in an area. They're useful as a sounding board, useful just for having a chat. But if you're putting any of these plans into either your own personal development through your SRDS or appraisal, they really need to be meaningful and targeted with a purpose. If you're putting them into a fellowship, this will absolutely be scrutinised, and you don't want to put in the same conferences each year or the same meetings, or a trip, say for me, to Melbourne. To do certain things, because it will look like a jolly. So it really needs to be meaningful, targeted, and with purpose. Okay, so finally, I'm just going to talk about the four elements of a fellowship. So people talk about the person, place, and the project, but certainly for NIHR fellowships, and for most personal development fellowships, personal development is weighted as equal as well as much as the project and the other elements, and that's something that they often leave to the last minute, which is just bizarre. So you really need to make sure that their personal development plan is appropriate for not just what you're doing for the fellowship, but particularly for say a doctoral, postdoctoral fellowship. They're to take you to the next level. And they're one of the only times in your life that you'll get paid to do personal development. So they're wanting to see something ambitious. They're wanting to see something that's targeted, and they're wanting to invest in you because it's a personal award. So be ambitious. Again, you might want to use the VTE framework around, what are the things that you need to do. And again, as I said, think about it in terms of your fellowship. And if you're doing, say, for example, if you're applying for a PhD, you know that most universities will be very good at doing the knowledge and the governance, but it's the other parts that are probably the things that you can be more ambitious with. And if you're doing a fellowship, if you're putting in something just where you're going to do this course in Leeds, this course in Leeds, this course in Leeds, it just looks like, well, what's this? Why are we investing more in you? You should be doing those in Leeds anyway. So be ambitious, find out where the best courses in the country are, and plan for those. So it's really important in terms of making sure that because with fellowships, they're looking for high quality methodology, high quality kind of execution of your research, but really they're looking for a high quality personal development plan that's going to take you to that next level. Your training does need to be balanced with the rest of the commitments. So one of the things I've had experience with PhD students who just like to do courses rather than do the research. That's not going to wash. So you absolutely need to balance out what you need to do in terms of courses versus what you need to do in terms of doing the research versus the rest of your time commitments. We all have lives outside of work. And one of the really important things with a fellowship, it affords you not to have to do all of your work on the weekends or, in the evenings. And so that you get to balance it with the rest of your commitments. A couple of things for people, if you're applying to IHR, you're expected to include some clinical training. So if you're in the healthcare professional and looking for one of the integrated clinical academic practitioner awards, you'll be expected to do some clinical training. Be careful that you're not overblowing the clinical training, but it's an opportunity for you to develop as well. If you don't want to develop clinically, you don't have to go for an IHR award. You can go for one of the all fellowship, everyone award. And then for some other NIHR clinical awards, if you're medically qualified or if you're a dentist as well as a healthcare professional, you can include clinical training. And that's particularly important, I think, when you're looking at particularly people early on where they need to develop clinical skills as well as they're developing their research skills. And then be creative. So is Chris Drake on the call? I don't think he is. So Chris Drake is one of my PhD colleagues. He's just been to RADA to do some presentation skills and has had an absolute ball doing it. And I'm sure he'd be happy to come and talk to anyone about it. But it's kind of like what he kind of said that, what he needed was, because of his role, he's quite senior physiotherapist. He needed something where he could project his authority in meetings where he felt very intimidated and quite junior with things like board meetings. And so, why not? So, it was a great thing to do. The other thing to do is that the timing of training when you're putting in a fellowship is really important. So you don't kind of do your systematic review, start off and then do your training for systematic review a year later. And by doing a Gantt chart, what that does is it helps you to think about the logical time that you should be able to do this or when it's available. And so therefore how you plan other things around. And of course, with a Gantt chart, you should also be putting in your other responsibilities, so holidays, etc., so that you can make sure that you're going to maximise the time. And it's a really good way to kind of make you realise in a fellowship how little time you do have to try and do it all. And finally, resources. So like PPI, they really want people to invest in them in kind of their development because the fellowship is an investment in you. So, make sure that, you're doing things that are appropriate and relevant and are costed into the grant, because it's this kind of activity that is very difficult to find funding for elsewhere. So in summary, start off with kind of finding a little bit more about yourself and about what are the things that float your boat, make you get up in the morning. Use the Vitae framework to do a personal inventory where you think you are in terms, and this is only for research competency, and you can do the same in terms of professional development for whatever discipline that you're within. Talk to others that are kind of, or, either peers or senior peers. So not, talk to your supervisors as well, but talking to senior peers or people who are a little bit further on down the pathway are usually, they'll have very relevant information. They'll also tell you. So we had one of our postdocs went to do a public dissemination course. I won't say where, and it was terrible. And so you need to know that if courses are good or if they're not good. The NHS Academy Leadership Program is fantastic. It's got a whole lot of different levels of leadership, much more intense than, say, the university one. But talk to people who've done it. Find out what's around there locally. And one of the really important things that I really want to get across is this is your journey. You have to take responsibility for your development. You can't expect your managers or supervisors to do this. You need to take control. And finally, the Vitae Research Development Framework is probably something that you may never have heard of before, but it's incredibly useful in terms of kind of trying to think of what it is that you need in terms of your research development. And with that, I'll stop presenting and open up for any questions or comments.
Yeah, so I'll just give a round of applause for Professor Anne-Maree Keenan for a wonderful tour de force in how to develop a personal and professional development training plans. So currently, I think the chat's a little bit quiet. So I'm just encouraging people, if you do have any questions, please put on the chat so that I can read them to Professor Anne-Maree Keenan. I've got a few questions for you, if that's all right, Professor Anne-Maree. In terms of I mean, cost, you mentioned about cost could be a potential an obstacle. Some people who don't get like external fellowship, for example, if they're working under supervisors who got the grants, and sometimes there's limited budget. Is there any way to go around apart from signing up for courses locally? Is there any other resources or anything that they can help, like a funding, extra funding, or anything that can be applied for?
So that's usually dependent on local kind of local opportunities for funding. So certainly I know that several institutes within the University of Leeds will have a small development fund. Some faculties will have a development fund of £1,000 a year. Faculty of Medicine and Health does not have that, unfortunately. But what that tends to be is there tends to be funds locally, and NHS organisations will have kind of opportunities, but it is one of the really sorry, I'm just looking at the the questions. They've kind of gone they've gone not necessarily on the personal development questions. But in the current environment, it's really difficult within both NHS and university organisations. Some charities might be able to offer you funding, and there might be some opportunities that come up irregularly, but it is one of the difficult areas, which is why fellowship funding is so good, which is why you're actually trying to do that. Right, shall we go back to
I think I think the question of chat, I think quite a lot of them due to like funding. Would you be happy to answer that, Anne-Maree, or do you think? Yep. So I think we've covered quite a lot of audience, like a large audience, because we promoted social media and so forth. We actually gone abroad, even to Pakistan, and we got quite a few sign up from abroad in Africa as well. So I think they was wondering whether if they really wanted to do a trial, whether like a study, was there any any funding opportunities in the UK for people from overseas, or you could pinpoint signpost the website potentially.
Yeah, so it's the NIHR. Both the NIHR have a global research funding opportunity. So if you just type in NIHR global health, that will take you to all of the different opportunities. Wellcome also have an opportunity for funding if you're in Pakistan, they have some fundings as well, so they're worth having a look at. MRC also have some, but things like the charities would need to be specific to the organisation. So there are potential for that.
Brilliant. So the next one asking, so from Chinonso, whether can we fit in like to do some MSc level training such as PG Dip in the fellowship plan?
You can't include an MSc if you're looking to do a PhD, because when are you going to fit it all in? They're two different degrees. But what you can do is modules, and certainly you could do modules within a master's program, and we have a lot of people who, for our MRes program, will take some of those modules. And again, we try to, and I'm assuming that you're talking about a PhD, but you could also do them. Sorry?
Postdoctoral, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. So yes, you can, but again, because you couldn't include a master's because that would be just too much. But it might be a grad dip. Or PG dip elements of it. What we encourage, certainly for people, we've had a lot of experience with people trying to do that during their PhD. It doesn't work because the assessments mean that they spend more time doing assessments. But in a postdoc and advanced fellowship, then there's a possibility for that. But again, it would need to be clearly articulated why, and it wasn't just a way of getting another qualification. Or if you were going to get a qualification, why that's important as part of your postdoc development.
So, like mentioned, now we have quite a wide background of attendees. So these are from Emma Pierce. So I think she wanted to some question about stepping into research as an allied healthcare professional. So I think she wanted some example of what might fit in, into each domain, especially for early starters.
So it depends on kind of what you're going for. So a pre-doctoral fellowship would only have very limited amounts in it. So you could certainly put in some modules around qualitative development or systematic reviews in terms of kind of knowledge-based information. Ethics could go into the governance. For kind of influence and engagement, you might want to put in some communication courses. You might want to talk about PPIE in terms of not just understanding PPIE, but engaging, doing PPIE properly. So there are a whole lot of different things, but the idea is that it needs to be relevant to you, which is the whole point of doing the personal inventory and your fellowship. So it will depend, and that's the whole point of doing the plan.
Okay, so the next one is talking about the balance thing that on your slide earlier, that scale. So Benjamin Foxcroft asking how in terms of tips, how do you get the balance right of not putting on too much activity versus not enough? I think this like from your reviewer's hat point of view.
I think it's got to be relevant. And I think, as I was saying, some people like to collect courses rather than do the work. And I think that always comes across if you're doing too much. Why are you doing this? How is it relevant to what you're doing? And so I think it's got to be a balance. That's where a Gantt chart becomes really relevant because you can see how much time you're doing training versus how much time that you've got to do the actual nuts and bolts of your the rest of your fellowship. Supervisors will be very useful in terms of what they think is relevant, and it's a balancing act, and it's around I think getting that proportion right, so that you're being able to deliver and you're supported to deliver on the fellowship, but then take that next step. So I think supervisors should be able to help. Previous awardees will also be able to help. And I think particularly in terms of, taking on too much and not doing it.
Okay, brilliant. So the next one is from Alex Tam. So this person thinking to apply for PCAF, but they can't find the formal course that probably associated with the topic. Whether something like independent study using online book resources, can that be included in the training plan, or would you advise to go further and discuss with the supervisors and trying to find like a better training plan for that?
Yeah, you can use online courses, that's fine. Just doing book study just rings alarm bells for me as a reviewer, because how do you know what you need to know if it's something that you don't know? Alex, are you on the call? Can you give me what kind of things are you looking at that you can't find a course for?
So I'm a radiographer and MR, and there's some image analysis knowledge that's to do with looking at the anatomy of the MR scans. There's one, for example, there's a course in Japan in Osaka. I don't think I can get there. but they've got the whole Oxford resources there that you can access for free. Will take about 5 weeks to do. Alternatively, do you see what I mean?
Oh, so that's kind of a little bit different than just yeah. So that if you're using a resource that's like that, certainly for a PCAF you couldn't go to Japan. That wouldn't be appropriate.
As nice as it would be, yeah.
Yeah, but it's how you present that. So if you just said independent study using an online and book resource, it's kind of like, what? So I think you need to kind of describe it more in detail so that you can put the time into your plan and justify why it isn't a cost, but why it's good. And so it's around telling that story. And this is where your supervisors will help. One of the things that research is a different language, and that one of the things that we often find with people who are new to research is that they just need to kind of be supported to develop that vocabulary, so that you're not kind of so you're putting a little bit more meaning into it, to what it is that you want in terms of that. So yeah, so that sounds fine. And but you just need to package it so that I'm not thinking, oh my God, how do you know what you're doing?
Thank you.
The next one from Claire Greenwood. So can a professional training plan for awards like the SCAPRA include a clinical skills course if it is mapped into their long-term career goals?
Claire, that kind of sounds more like, rather than a SCAPRA, that sounds more like an ACAF. So there's the SCAPRA, and sorry for the acronyms, the Senior Clinical and Clinical Academic Practitioner Research Awards are for people who don't have research, have got PhDs or an MD, and who don't have research in their title, getting back involved in research. So clinical development probably isn't important. If it was related to clinical development to allow you to do research into that area, maybe. But I think if that's something that you want to do, I think SCAPRA's not the way for you. It's ACAF. So it's an advanced clinical academic fellowship, because that has your clinical development in there. And you've got to remember, it's a much more generous award than SCAPRA. SCAPRA only really covers minor personal development and your salary, whereas the ACAF, or the Advanced Fellowship, is much more generous. And if that's kind of what you want to do, you're probably looking, you'd be better off looking at that. Okay, oh, Matt's yelling at me.
Yeah.
Got how you did font. That, Matt.
It's got a big font. I think she's been waiting for this. So what's the best way to schedule our training so that we can go off on helpful tangents when needed, but not end up sidetracked for months?
I think it's got to be the Gantt chart, and for the whole of the fellowship, so that you're limited then to the amount of time and when you have the time to do things. So there will be certain things in everyone's fellowship that will be time dependent, and those things you need to put in and then work out your training around that. And I think give yourself kind of a limited time, so that you're not going off on these tangents and not absolutely delivering on your actual award.
Okay,
that's great. Thank you, Anne-Maree.
Next, we got Mike. So we're talking about conferences now.
Yep.
So you said to target different conferences, but what if there is only one main conference and it will be more beneficial to go to that one several times instead of smaller, less relevant ones?
Mike, are we talking about a conference in Perth by chance? Or did that conference not exist anymore?
No, that one doesn't exist anymore. But but in theory, say it is.
So you'd need to justify why you're going back, because it'll look like a jolly. That if you're going back every year, is that the best use of your time? What are you getting out of it that you wouldn't, and it may be, and because maybe for things like psychometric evaluation, that there is only one conference, but just argue why, because it would immediately bring up questions in my mind around, you know, you're doing this because you just like a jolly, you just like going to conferences. So make it targeted. Why on earth it is. Do not go to conferences that are not relevant, because that makes absolutely no sense. But it's really having that discussion around, why are you going to this conference? You know, what is the point? Is it networking? Is it to find collaborators? Is it to disseminate your information? Is it to get feedback on your information? So those are the kind of things that you just need to kind of decide, you know, what you need to be doing for every one of those kind of activities.
Okay, I think we got a last question before our time is up. So Keenan so asking a question again about if he was to go for a 50% fellowship, does he need to include other academic activities outside of the fellowship in his Gantt chart?
No, but not for the funder, but you need to include them for your personal sanity. So particularly if so if you're looking at, you're going to be teaching half-time, then you know that there are busy times in that academic time, so you need to make sure that they're included in your plan. Because otherwise, or if you're doing clinical activities, you need to know when the busy times are for that. So don't confuse the applications, because you only put in that what you're going to be doing for the fellowship for that 50%, because otherwise you will confuse them. But absolutely do it for yourself, so that you've got the Gantt charts. I can't tell you that you need to update them all the time, because things happen that that you kind of don't need to. You don't plan on it, so you have to do it. But it's always a really good way of actually making sure that you're on track with delivering, because everything takes longer than what you think, and for most activities it's really critical.
I'm really sorry, Anne-Maree. Can we just squeeze in one more question? I think it's quite important, if that's all right. Yeah, because I think we've got 9 minutes to. So from Tolulop, so how would the NIHR review panel view an incorporation of a consultant level training as part of clinical training for an ICA program, especially if there seems to be a lot of overlap between both? Yeah.
You'd need to be a bit careful about that, because they're different things. And so while the NIHR would be, they're very keen on healthcare professionals developing clinically, it's the equivalent of 1 day a week. And that's what would be expected for a full-time fellowship or the equivalent thereof. And it would be pro rata depending on what you want to do. It would become very clear if you're kind of doing too much clinical development, and that will be a risk. So I'd be just very, very careful about that, and have a think about what can you do clinically that may be progressing towards both opportunities, but is still, because there are other ways of getting consultant role, and doing a PhD is kind of not the easiest way of doing that. But if you can put in some clinical training, and it underlines some, then do it. But it has to be, appropriate proportions, so no more than 20% of or equivalent pro rata of a full-time fellowship.
Thank you so much, Professor Anne-Maree Keenan, for a wonderful talk, and also the very interactive session with plenty of questions answered, including questions about funding as well. So we're all really grateful for your time, for enlightening us. I just want to share again. So our feedback. So QR code. So there you go. So if you could, fill the feedback survey, and you will also get a certificate of completion for your record. There you go. And also the recordings will be available about a couple of weeks following this talk on our YouTube channel, also located there as well. Just letting you know, so before we finish, so the next series will be in 2 weeks' time, on a Wednesday, 20th November, where we will have both Professor Anne Morgan and Professor Heman Pandit, where they will both discuss and talk about the separation between supervision, mentorship, and research advocates. And please feel free to sign up to this session by the Friday, 15 November, using that link below as well. So that's it for today. So thank you everyone for participating in the event, and hope you have a nice, lovely day.